At Hitler's mountaintop hideaway, the Obersalzberg in southern Bavaria, he maintained a private house, the Berghof. Around it was arranged the private houses of some of his top ministers, including Martin Bormann, Hermann Göring, and Albert Speer, alongside special guest houses for visiting officers, officials, and VIPs, a huge SS barracks complex for Hitler's bodyguard unit, as well as tea houses, staff quarters, a kindergarten, and a post office. Hitler tried to spend as much time as he could at this heavily guarded Nazi Alpine village, but was often at his Eastern Front headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, or in Berlin, or some other Führer headquarters complex. One person who was nearly always at the Obersalzberg was his girlfriend, Eva Braun, who came to be called the Lady of the Obersalzberg by staff and locals. She lived in a suite of rooms at the Berghof, where Hitler kept her isolated from the general public, few Germans knowing of her existence. At Obersalzberg, Braun created a sort of court, with herself at the centre of it. And she and her family and friends enjoyed the beautiful buildings and the servants, swimming in the local lakes in the summer, skiing in the winter, and enjoying parties in Hitler's many tea houses and guest houses, including the famous Eagle's Nest. Eva Braun had been with Hitler since 1929, when she was working as an assistant for Nazi photographer Heinrich Hoffmann. She was 23 years younger than Hitler, who had a penchant for younger women, and since 1929 had become closer and closer to the Führer, particularly following the possible suicide of Gaily Raubel, Hitler's half-niece, with whom it is supposed he was having a sexual relationship. Braun really caught Hitler's attention by attempting suicide herself a year later, shooting herself in the chest with her father's pistol. It certainly got Hitler's full attention, and by the end of 1932 they were lovers. She attempted suicide again in May 1935, overdosing on sleeping pills when she felt Hitler wasn't paying her enough attention. After this, Hitler gave Eva an apartment in Munich that she shared with her sister, Gretl, and in 1936 gifted them a villa at Bogenhausen. She divided her time later between the Berghof and her Munich apartment. Her parents were both alive during the war. Her father, Friedrich Braun, was a school teacher and reserve army officer, and her mother, Franziska, had been a seamstress before marriage. Her elder sister, Ilse, worked initially as an assistant for a Jewish surgeon, and later worked in Albert Speer's architectural design office in Berlin. She kept out of politics and generally stayed away from the Obersalzberg. She died in Munich in 1979, having had no children. In contrast to Ilse, Eva Braun's younger sister Gretl was right at the centre of the Nazi social scene. She had also worked for Heinrich Hoffmann, and like Eva was a keen photographer. A flirtatious woman who enjoyed the luxury lifestyle her sister's relationship to Hitler brought the family. She enjoyed flirting with the military adjutants and partying. She fell in love with Hitler's SS adjutant, Fritz Darges, who had seen combat in France and Russia. Though Darges had a relationship with Gretl, he refused to marry her, despite pressure from Hitler, who was rather old-fashioned when it came to relationships, and pressured some of his aides to marry. After the relationship with Darges ended, the SS officer, now a lieutenant colonel, fell rather dramatically from grace. He fell foul of Hitler, who apparently had not forgiven him for refusing to marry Gretl, during a military situation conference at the Wolf's Lair on the 18th of July 1944, 2 days before the famous bomb plot. A fly was buzzing around the conference hut and landed on Hitler's shoulder. Irritated, Hitler asked Darges to get rid of it. Perhaps as a joke, Darges replied that as it was a fly, it was the responsibility of the Air Force, and Hitler's Luftwaffe adjutant, Colonel Nikolaus von Below, should deal with it. Hitler dismissed Darges on the spot, and he was transferred to a combat position on the Eastern Front. The real reason for Darges' fall from grace may have been his relationship with Gretl Braun, and his refusal to marry her despite Hitler's insistence. Darges survived the war and died in 2009 at the age of 96. After the relationship with Darges finished, Gretl Braun next fell for Walther Hewel, a much more senior Nazi figure and a popular member of Hitler's inner circle. Hewel was a diplomat on Joachim von Ribbentrop's staff and acted as Ribbentrop's liaison at Führer headquarters. About 40 years old when they began their affair, and single, he was the life and soul of the party, and Hitler was keen that he settle down and marry. Hewel had initially wanted to marry Sigrid von Laffert, much to Hitler's approval, as Hitler found her glamorous and enchanting company, a feeling shared by his inner circle, who wanted her to join the club. But von Laffert eventually married a German aristocrat working at the embassy in Madrid in Spain. Hewel, despite Hitler's urgings, was less keen on marrying Gretl Braun. According to a contemporary report, Hitler told Hewel that if he married Gretl, he would appoint him ambassador to Rome, but Hewel instead married somebody else, leading to Hitler banishing him from the inner circle. Later, Hitler forgave him, and he returned. Hewel stayed with Hitler to the bitter end in Berlin. After Hitler's suicide, Hewel joined one of the breakout groups from the bunker, but failed to escape from the shattered city. He shot himself when Red Army troops arrived to take his group captive in a brewery on the 2nd of May 1945. Gretl Braun next became enamored of Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler's liaison officer at Führer headquarters, SS General Hermann Fegelein. A cavalry officer, he rose from a pre-war jockey to a high level in the Nazi regime. During the invasion of Poland in 1939, Fegelein's regiment was involved in the mass shooting of 1,700 civilians in the Campinos forest. Fegelein was officially reprimanded for looting, sending a variety of stolen items back from Poland to the SS Cavalry School, including a truck, a Mercedes-Benz car, a Skoda cabriolet, food, coffee, clothes, and valuable furs. Himmler protected Fegelein from prosecution. During the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, Fegelein's regiment saw plenty of action, but it was also assigned the task of rounding up and shooting Jews, partisans, and others deemed undesirable in Belarus. Fegelein's unit killed 13,788 Jews and a further 3,500 men deemed as partisans. Wounded by a sniper in action in December 1941, he then commanded the 8th SS Cavalry Division Florian Geyer on the Eastern Front. Wounded again in October 1943, he was assigned as Himmler's SS liaison at Hitler's inner court. He was popular, arrogant but dashing and good-looking, with the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. A frank and direct man, he became close to the sinister Martin Bormann, Hitler's Machiavellian personal secretary and minister without portfolio, joining him at his frequent drinking parties. Eva Braun noticed Fegelein as well, and she admitted to a friend that she had fallen in love with him. But Eva was sensible enough not to cross Hitler, and Fegelein, though he flirted with both Braun's sisters constantly, was also very careful to maintain a correct relationship with the Führer. Before long, however, he was in a relationship with Gretl. A philanderer par excellence, Fegelein cheated on Gretl both before and during their marriage, including trying to seduce Hitler's female secretaries. Many of the men in Hitler's inner circle didn't like the arrogant SS general very much, Albert Speer calling him one of the most disgusting people in Hitler's circle. Fegelein did his duty well, treated Hitler with great respect, but Fegelein wasn't slow in telling others that he was too good for the job, and evidently he was bored by his responsibilities. Despite these problems, Fegelein decided to marry Gretl. Why? Probably because it would place him in an unassailable position of power and influence right next to the Führer. Fegelein was most definitely a pragmatist with a strong survival instinct. The wedding on the 3rd of June 1944 was the high point of the inner circle's social calendar. It was planned in great detail by Eva Braun. The wedding ceremony itself took place in the Marble Hall at the Mirabell Palace in Salzburg. The wedding ceremony, instead of being a Christian event, was in fact a pagan-style wedding, much favoured by senior SS officers. In fact, Heinrich Himmler himself officiated at the ceremony, and the witness was Frau Bormann, amongst others. The bride and groom were next driven to the Berghof, where they could pay their respects to the Führer. There was a wedding reception at the Berghof that lasted until early evening. It was held in the Great Hall, the building's largest room, that included the famous picture window with its panoramic views over the valley and mountains beyond. Following the wedding reception, the Fegeleins and their guests, except Hitler, were driven up to the Eagle's Nest elevator, the happy couple being personally chauffeured up the mountain by Frau Bormann. They then ascended the final part of the journey in Hitler's plush elevator inside the mountain to the Eagle's Nest, more formally the Kelstein Mountain Diplomatic Reception House, where they partied on and off for 3 days. The main hall at the Eagle's Nest, where the wedding party occurred, is little changed today and functions now as a restaurant. But the party was brought to an abrupt end on the 6th of June 1944 when news arrived that the Allies had landed in Normandy. Hitler left the Berghof on the 14th of July 1944 to go to the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, never to return. With him went his liaison officers and staff, including Hermann Fegelein. 6 days later, and Count von Stauffenberg planted a bomb in the conference hut at the Wolf's Lair, narrowly missing killing Hitler. Fegelein was present when the bomb detonated, receiving a minor wound to his left thigh. For the regime's final few months, Fegelein remained on Hitler's staff, moving between different Führer headquarters and seeing little of his wife, who became pregnant. By January 1945, Hitler was at his final headquarters, in Berlin, following the failure of the Ardennes offensive in the west and the opening of a huge Soviet winter offensive in the east. On the 19th of January, Gretl arrived at the Reich Chancellery accompanied by Eva Braun. Hitler sent both women to Berchtesgaden on the 9th of February to escape the danger in the city, but Eva would return to be with Hitler to the end. With the Soviet encirclement of the city by late April 1945, the situation looked grim for Fegelein. Stuck down in the Führer bunker with an increasingly deranged Hitler, he evidently decided to save himself, as Hitler had by now ruled out leaving the Reich capital. On the 23rd of April, Gretl received a final letter from Eva Braun asking her to destroy all of her business correspondence. Her private letters from Hitler and those she had sent to the Führer were to be sent to Fegelein's brother Waldemar, an SS colonel in the 8th Cavalry Division, and secreted, probably on Hermann Fegelein's instructions, at Fischhorn Castle, perhaps as a future bargaining chip with the Allies. Hermann Göring would end up at Fischhorn Castle under US guard at war's end, and Eva Braun's correspondence disappeared from the US occupation of the castle, never to be seen again. Fegelein attempted to exit Berlin without permission on the 27th of April 1945, 3 days before Hitler's suicide. When Hitler demanded to see Fegelein during a conference, he couldn't be found in the bunker or in the Reich Chancellery. A unit of Hitler's bodyguards went to Fegelein's apartment in the city and found the general drunk and in bed with his mistress. The young woman managed to escape out of a bathroom window, but Fegelein was brought back to the bunker under arrest, along with the evidence of his desertion, suitcases packed with money and civilian clothes and fake identity documents. Eva Braun interceded on his behalf, pleading with Hitler that Fegelein be spared, as he was the father of her sister's unborn child. Hitler relented, for now at least. But then, in the evening of the 28th of April, news arrived of Heinrich Himmler's secret peace negotiations with the Western Allies. Hitler hit the roof, and he ordered that Himmler be arrested. In reality, Himmler remained at large in northern Germany, surrounded by loyal bodyguards and adjutants. But Hitler could at least strike at Fegelein, Himmler's SS liaison, who was supposed to have been in league with his boss. Fegelein was placed before a hasty court-martial, convened in the bunker, found guilty of desertion and sentenced to death. His uniform was stripped of its many medals and decorations, his epaulets torn off, and then, thoroughly humiliated, Fegelein was frog-marched topside by some of Hitler's RSD bodyguards, and in between Soviet bombardments in the Reich Chancellery garden, an SS officer shot him in the neck. His body was kicked into a shell hole and hastily covered over with soil and rubble. Then there followed a second Nazi wedding on the 29th of April 1945, this time between Hitler and Eva Braun, a marriage that also ended in death the following afternoon in the bunker. As for Gretl Fegelein, she gave birth to a daughter on the 5th of May 1945 at the Obersalzberg, the girl being named Eva in memory of her sister. Gretl remarried in 1954 to businessman Kurt Berlinghoff, living quietly in Munich. Her daughter Eva committed suicide in 1975 following the death of her boyfriend in a car accident. Gretl Berlinghoff passed away in Steingarten, Bavaria, in October 1987 at the age of 72. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.